All right. So you guys ready to hear about programmatic advertising? So I'm going to talk about programmatic advertising, and I'm going to talk about 5 ways that is going to change our industry. And to begin with, what is programmatic advertising? It is buying clicks through software, through an API, right? And so every day, 3.5 billion searches are done at Google. It's the biggest marketplace on the planet. And if you have a website with products to sell, there's a pretty good chance that people will go through this search box somewhere along the buying process to find your products. So your job is, how do you get your ad to show for the most profitable buyers that are out there? And so the problem is, you're not the only one that is trying to get traffic from Google to buy your products. There's a lot of people competing for these clicks. And we're going to talk about how you can use programmatic advertising for search and for shopping. Not the traditional display way, but how you can do this for search and shopping to help you find and locate the most profitable clicks that are out there. And so we're going to talk about this in 5 different ways. One is the complexity, what's going on with the increased complexity around buying clicks. The second is how we can structure and organize accounts so that we can get data that software can work on. We're going to talk about market coverage, specifically keyword expansion, how you can make sure that you are there when people are buying your products or services. And we're going to talk about increased competition. We're going to talk about quality score. How can you use software to influence quality score with Google? And at the end, we're going to talk about attribution modeling. How can you use attribution modeling as a competitive advantage when it comes to buying clicks? So, complexity. 5 years ago, you could pick match types. There was a single text ad, and that was about it. Now things are different. You have how many devices can you buy clicks from? Desktop, mobile, tablet. You have user profiles. You have remarketing campaigns. You have ad extensions. There's a lot of stuff going on in an AdWords account. And each of these things have dramatic impact on how the click converts. Right? And that conversion rate matters because that's what tells you how much you can spend on clicks. So I'm going to give you an example. So imagine you have a product catalog. You're a small retailer and you have 2,500 products in your catalog. And then for each of those products, there may be 4 variables that you can be searched for. Maybe a title, a brand, a manufacturer ID, a UPC code, something like that, right? And so now you have 10,000 keywords. Each of those 10,000 keywords has 4 match types: exact, phrased, broad, broad modifier, right? So now you got 40,000 variations. And then you have desktop, tablet, and mobile versions of those clicks. So now you have 120,000 variations. You with me? And then you have a new visitor, someone that's been to your homepage, someone that's been to your product page, someone that has abandoned the cart, and someone that has completed a purchase. So 5 different profiles that converts very differently. So now you got 600,000 variations of clicks that you can buy from a small 2,500 product catalog. And you don't know which of those 600,000 clicks or variations you're going to get until somebody hits enter or clicks search. And so is that a problem that you want to try to solve manually with people and spreadsheets? No. You want to do this programmatically through software that interacts with Google. So what might one of those user profiles look like? So you have, there's the user data, the device, the site visits, the locations they have, all the stuff about the user if you structure it right. And then you have all the history of the keyword. You know the match type, you know the revenue history, cost history, profit history. So you marry all these things up. And now you can predict exactly how much that next click is worth. Because that's what you're really trying to find out. How much is that next click worth? Because if you know that, then you know how much you can bid and still make money of it. Because at the end of the day, why are we doing this? We're trying to make money from buying clicks from Google. So if you structure the account in a certain way, you can deal with the data that sits there. So how do we get these data? If you structure an account in a certain way, you can get to all this data. Right? There is at least as many opinions about how to structure an account as there are advertisers. The only objective that exists when you're trying to organize and structure an account is to gain actionable data. And so one way to do that very effectively is to create single keyword ad groups. Right? So when you tell Google, for example, that you want an exact match or you want a broad match modifier keyword, that's what you put in the account. And then, but if you go and look in the details, Google will serve up broad match modifier, phrase match, and exact match clicks. They'll just do what they think is best. But for you, it's catastrophic because these match times perform so differently, so you have to isolate them. And if you put them in a single keyword ad groups, you can create absolute separation, and you can get much more accurate on driving the performance of your AdWords campaigns. Right? This is one keyword that is split out. And when you have software to build campaigns, this stuff is easy. Right? You don't want to try to manage this stuff manually. Right? But if you get all this data organized and structured, you can figure out that this is for one keyword. In one version of that keyword, it's worth 38 cents for that click. And in another instance, you're worth paying $15 for it. It's the same keyword. It just has all these variances in the attributes. And so you got to figure this stuff out real time. And if you do that, your ad budget is going to be infinitely more accurate. And if you show up when Google runs that click auction, if you show up with this level of information and you're competing with someone that runs on a $20 CPA model where every conversion is worth the same, who do you think is going to win? Whoever has the most data when they enter that auction wins, right? Third, keyword management. How many of you guys are in AdWords accounts? Right? So if you look in any average AdWords account, you're going to see that it's a history of lots of people and agencies that's added to this keyword bank over time. And none of those are present to be accountable for it. Because it's a messy, expensive process to drive new keywords into an account. Because you have to spend enough money to figure out if they're going to perform or not. Right? So, but there's ways you can automate this. Programmatically, you can use software to do this. And so this is a lot of the time what happens. If somebody says, we need to grow our revenues from AdWords. So you go in and you start adding keywords to the keyword bank. And your keywords grow, your revenues grow, but your profit starts to tank. Because it's hard to do this. Right? But there's a couple of ways you can do it. This is the easiest and best way to do it. Even if you're not doing it programmatically, you can do this by hand, right? So if you go, let's say that we have a keyword that is red shoes. And I go in and I type great red shoes. So now I have a phrase match version of that keyword. If that converts, I will go and snap out great red shoes and create a new keyword from it. So if you do this systematically over time, your keyword bank keeps increasing based on what your customers are buying, and you keep the relevance. That keyword that you add needs to be added as an exact match. Remember that, because I'm going to come back to that in a little bit. Right? The other way to do it is through an XML feed. If you're an e-commerce company and you have a product catalog, you have to integrate that catalog with your AdWords account. It's impossible to do it manually. Why? Because keywords keeps changing, ads keeps changing, and you're starting to deal with thousands and thousands of keywords and ads. It's just not possible to do this manually. So quality score is the big black box that Google has when it comes to them deciding which ad goes on top. Which ad does Google put on top? The one that's going to make them the most money, right? Google is in the business of selling clicks to make money for Google, and they're very good at it. Every time they do this, when they present those ads, they got a huge software engine that sits behind this that stacks the deck in their favor, right? But there's ways that you can stack the deck in your favor, not by spreadsheets, but through software, right? So this is how it works. Click-through rate drives quality score, and quality score drives ad rank. That's the thing that keeps running, right? And when Google decides which ads to go on top, 50% of this is on the bid. The bid is easy to change, but the quality score is really hard to change, but it's 40%, right? So there's two things that keeps going on, and it's counterintuitive, because the higher the max cost per click, the higher the ad rank, and the higher the quality score, right? As that goes up, your actual cost will go down. So the trick is, how do you bid as much as possible to drive your cost down? That's how it works, all right? Does it make sense? Little nodding. So take it this. This is what we call the Google wheel of goodness. And imagine that you're feeding an exact match keyword into this circle. It has a higher conversion rate, which means it takes less clicks, so you can bid higher. That drives position, and position drives click-through rate. Click-through rate drives quality score, which drives ad rank. So you have this thing that's feeding. And remember when we talked about adding new keywords as exact match? That's what's getting fed into this. Because this exact match thing matters so much. Because the relevance, an exact match may convert at 5%, and a broad match may convert at 0.25% if you're lucky, which means that exact match click is worth 25 times as much. And that's assuming that you're going to control your cost of revenues to be the same, right? But people typically don't do this. They get sloppy, and they do these things manually. So the part of the campaign that's making money is wasted on the part of the campaign that's not making money. So this is what happens. This is a German client that we launched just over a year ago. When we launched them, they had about the same number of conversion volume from exact, phrased, and broad, right? And then we deployed this strategy, and they went from just over 200 exact match conversions to almost 1,200. That's a huge growth. And the phrased and the broad stayed the same. But this is done by farming out exact match keywords and getting behind them. Finally, we're going to talk about attribution. So what does attribution have to do with programmatic? Well, how you attribute revenues to the money you spend is what feeds this programmatic engine, right? Because all the things I've talked about so far can be fully automated, 100%, right? But what you fit into it matters. And so this is always an interesting discussion we have with clients or with new prospects. Where do you look when it comes to determining whether you're performing well or not? What is your success metric? Right? Because if you look in your accounting system, you can look in analytics, you can look in your AdWords account, or you can look in, Adobe or whatever it is. These things are very different numbers, and they never match up because they're different ways of attributing the revenues. And that matters when you use that data to decide where you're going to spend your money to grow your business. Right? So here's an example of attribution models. Right? So you have on the far left side, you have Google Analytics, which uses last click attribution, which means the last action that happened before the conversion had to be the click on an ad. There can't be any other activities in between, right? So that is the most conservative way of counting it. And typically, you will lose 40+% of the conversions. On the far right side, you use Google AdWords tracking. And it's the last click, but it's not necessarily had to be the last action before the conversion. As long as an ad is clicked within the conversion window, it will get credit, right? So click on an ad, go have dinner, come back on a direct search, this still gets credit, right? And then you have the cross-device conversions, where you sit on the bus home, on your mobile device, logged into Google, do a search, click on an ad, then come home, go on your Windows or on your desktop computer, get directly to the site, and Google will, through your user profile, match those up and count it as a conversion. And then you can add in phone conversions, maybe there's an in-store conversion. So you have ways to attribute this. Because what you're trying to do, you're looking for relationships between your spend and your revenues. This is not your accounting system. You're looking for relationships that you can automate and replicate to make more money. And so let's say that to the left is one advertiser and to the right is another one. They both have the same goal. Cost of revenue is 10% and they have a 1% conversion rate. This guy is only counting this, so he recognizes $1,000 in revenues. The other guy has identified other sources of revenues that comes from the spend and is counting 2,000. So when they use that data to decide how much they're going to pay for the next click, this guy can spend $1 and the other guy can spend $2. It's the same thing that happened. It's just different ways of counting this. The guy that spends $2, who's going to sit in position number 1? The guy that bids 2. Position is higher, click-through rate's higher, he gets more revenues, and quality score goes up. He's got this thing going his way. This makes sense? It's not necessarily intuitive, because you don't want to bid more because you're spending your money. But because of how Google works with click-through rates and quality score, the higher bids a lot of the time helps drive the cost down. So there's also another thing that Google introduced last year where you can do different attribution models. First click, last click, time decay, or position-based. We typically use position-based for a whole slew of different reasons. But when you start, so think about all the things we've talked about. The complexity, the campaign structure, the keyword expansions, how to drive quality score, and this attribution model. You start adding all these things up. And when you start making changes on the attribution model, you restack this thing quite dramatically. So it's really hard to do manually, but really easy to do in software. And keep in mind, whether you do this or not, your competitors may be using this methodology, and that's what ultimately matters, because you're all competing for those clicks, which is the buyers that you're going after. So we talked about complexity. We've talked about how to structure this to get data from it. We've talked about how to execute on the AdWords expansions. We've talked about how to influence quality score and how the attribution modeling works, right? So then the question is, okay, so that's interesting. Does it work? So let me show you a couple of examples. So these are 4 different examples of clients that have implemented the programmatic approach fully. And you can see that this is not 4 or 5% increase in revenues at same type cost. These are dramatic changes that happens. And why? Because you're competing with junior kids that sits in agencies working spreadsheets and scripts, as opposed to having a software engine that does this. Google does not use junior people and spreadsheets to figure out all their stuff. They're using software. Maybe advertisers should too, right? And so, you remember this slide that we looked earlier, where you drive the exact match conversions up? Here's a couple other things that also happens. What happens to the max cost per click, the average cost per click? It always doubled for the exact match. Well, that can't be good. You don't want to pay more, right? But let's see what happens when you look at the cost per acquisition. Hard to read from the side. So on the cost per acquisition, it stays almost the same, right? Because yes, you're bidding more for the exact match clicks, but it's almost the same on the CPA. And it's the benefit of driving the exact match clicks, getting the quality scores, and getting the the ad ranks that stacks the deck in your favor. It will make you compete so much more effectively when you do this. So that's what I had to share. If anyone has any questions, I'm all ears. Anyone? Oh, come on. Can I ask you questions? All right.
You can.
How many of you guys run an AdWords account? And does anybody use tools? I talked to you earlier. So, but this, you have to look into this. This is not about using Finch. This is about a whole change that's going to happen in our industry. It just makes too much sense. It does not make sense to have people sit and do all this work. You have to use software to do it. There's plenty of other things for people to do. And this is not something that's going to replace people that everyone's worried about. Absolutely not. If anything, we're going to need more people, but just to do different things.
For what kind of size of a company is it good to use this automation, this tool, your tool? So what kind of clients are interesting for you to use Finch? What kind of size of a company? Okay, so what size clients and what type of clients are interesting for us to work with? We work with clients. It doesn't have so much to do with the size of the client. It is more about what's going on in the account. And it goes back to we can't optimize nothing. So it needs to be some conversion volume, at least 2-3 conversions a day minimum, 5,000 plus spend a month type thing. So there's data being gathered. But we work with a lot of small companies, and we work with large companies like Zurich Insurance or Salesforce or companies like that. But we also work with a lot of small clients, and we also have a lot of mid-sized clients that used to be small when they came to us. Right? So it's more about what's going on in the AdWords account and the data volume than the size of the business per se. So it could be also interesting for a company who just started like an e-commerce or and they have spend like $500 a month or just for the beginning or a week maybe. Is it also interesting for them to use the tool? Well, like they have no setup yet, they just start with AdWords, fresh account.
So if you're not set up yet, we have some partners, including Google, that may help get the account built out. Because usually when you start, and if you spend 500, the chances are that the account is not fully built out. So it just needs to get built out so you get the volume going, right? But come talk to us, and if we can't help you right now, we'll bring in Google to do the initial work or some other partner and go make it happen.
Thank you.
Anyone else? All right. Thank you.
Okay then, thank you very much. Big applause, please.